Behind every safe takeoff and landing is a team of highly skilled professionals, working with pilots to keep the skies safe with calm focus and quiet authority. The task of ensuring safe operations of commercial and private aircraft falls on air traffic controllers. They must coordinate the movements of thousands of aircraft, keep them at safe distances from each other, direct them during takeoff and landing from airports, direct them around bad weather, and ensure that traffic flows smoothly with minimal delays.
We'll follow a flight from departure to arrival, looking at the various controllers involved, what each one does, the equipment they use, and how they are trained. The controllers monitor this plane and give instructions to the pilot. As the plane leaves that airspace division and enters another, the air traffic controller passes it off to the controllers responsible for the new airspace division.
Suppose you are flying, perhaps from Envida Hammamet International Airport to Manchester. Your flight, like every other commercial airline flight, follows a typical profile. Pre-flight: this portion of the flight starts on the ground and includes flight checks, push back from the gate and taxi to the runway. Takeoff: the pilot powers up the aircraft and speeds down the runway. Departure: the plane lifts off the ground and climbs to a cruising altitude. En route, the aircraft travels through one or more center airspaces and nears the destination airport. Descent: the pilot descends and maneuvers the aircraft to the destination airport. Approach: the pilot aligns the aircraft with the designated landing runway. Landing: the aircraft lands on the designated runway, taxis to the destination gate and parks at the terminal.
While you prepare for your flight by checking your bags and walking to the gate, your pilot inspects your plane and files a flight plan with the tower. All IFR pilots must file a flight plan at least 30 minutes prior to pushing back from the gate. Your pilot reviews the weather along the intended route, maps the route and files the plan. The flight plan includes advertisement, airline name and flight number, type of aircraft and equipment, intended airspeed and cruising altitude, route of flight, departure airport, centers that will be crossed, and destination airport.
In the tower, a controller called a flight data person reviews the weather and flight plan information and enters the flight plan into the host computer. The computer generates a flight progress strip that will be passed from controller to controller throughout your flight. The flight progress strip contains all of the necessary data for tracking your plane during its flight and is constantly updated. Once the flight plan has been approved, the flight data person gives clearance to your pilot, clearance delivery, and passes the strip to the ground controller in the tower. The ground controller is responsible for all ground traffic, which includes aircraft taxiing from the gates to takeoff runways and from landing runways to the gates. When the ground controller determines that it is safe, he or she directs your pilot to push the plane back from the gate. Airline personnel operate the tugs that actually push the aircraft back and direct the plane out of the gate area. As your plane taxis to the runway, the ground controller watches all of the airport's taxiways and uses ground radar to track all of the aircraft, especially useful in bad weather, ensuring that your plane does not cross an active runway or interfere with ground vehicles. The ground controller talks with your pilot by radio and gives him instructions, such as which way to taxi and which runway to go to for takeoff. Once your plane reaches the designated takeoff runway, the ground controller passes the strip to the local controller.
The local controller in the tower watches the skies above the airfield and uses surface radar to track aircraft. He or she is responsible for maintaining safe distances between planes as they take off. The local controller gives your pilot final clearance for takeoff when it is deemed safe, and provides the new radio frequency for the departure controller. Once clearance is given, your pilot must decide if it is safe to take off. If it is safe, he accelerates the plane down the runway. As you leave the ground, the local controller hands your plane off electronically to the departure controller at the TRACON facility that services your departure airport, but still monitors the plane until it is 5 miles from the airport. Your pilot now talks with the departure controller.
Once your plane take off, your pilot activates a transponder device inside the aircraft. The transponder detects incoming radar signals and broadcasts an amplified, encoded radio signal in the direction of the detected radar wave. The transponder signal provides the controller with your aircraft's flight number, altitude, airspeed and destination. A blip representing the airplane appears on the controller's radar screen with this information beside it. The controller can now follow your plane.
The departure controller is located in the tracking facility, which may have several airports within its airspace, 50-mile, 80 km radius. He or she uses radar to monitor the aircraft and must maintain safe distances between ascending aircraft. The departure controller gives instructions to your pilot, heading, speed, rate of ascent, to follow regular ascent corridors through the tracking airspace. The departure controller monitors your flight during ascent to the en route portion. When your plane leaves tracking airspace, the departure controller passes your plane off to the center controller, ARTCC controller. Every time your plane gets passed between controllers, an updated flight progress slip gets printed and distributed to the new controller.
En route and descent. Once your plane has left TRACON airspace, it enters a sector of the ARTCC airspace, where it is monitored by at least 2 air traffic controllers. The radar associate controller receives the flight plan information anywhere from 5 to 30 minutes prior to your plane entering that sector. The associate controller works with the radar controller in charge of that sector. The radar controller is in charge of all air-to-ground communication, maintains safe separation of aircraft within the sector and coordinates activities with other sectors and/or centers. The controllers must monitor the airspace at high altitude, above 24,000 feet, 7,320 meters, and low altitude, below 24,000 feet. The center controllers provide your pilot with updated weather and air traffic information. They also give directions to your pilot regarding such aspects as speed and altitude to maintain a safe separation between aircraft within their sector. They monitor your plane until it leaves their sector. Then they pass it off to another sector's controller.
Called the radar handoff controller, assists the radar and associate radar controllers during times of heavy traffic, watching the radar screen and helping to maintain smooth air traffic flow.
Your plane gets passed from sector to sector and center to center. In each sector, center controllers radio instructions to the pilots. The path of your plane may have to be changed from the original flight plan to move around bad weather or avoid a congested sector. Your pilots may request a change in altitude to avoid or reduce turbulence. This back and forth between pilots and center controllers continues until you are about 150 miles, 241 kilometers, from Manchester, your destination. At this point, the center controller directs all planes flying into Manchester to move from high altitudes to low altitudes and merges the descending aircraft into a single file line toward the airport. The controller gives instructions to your pilot, such as changes in heading, speed and altitude, to place your plane in line with these other aircraft. Depending on traffic conditions, the controller may have to place your plane into a holding pattern, which is a standard route around each airport, where you wait until the airport can handle your arrival. The controller continues to give directions to your pilot until your plane is within tracking airspace.
When your descending plane is 50 miles from the Envida airport, it is within TRACON airspace. An approach controller directs your pilot to adjust the aircraft's heading, speed and altitude to line up and prepare to land along standard approach corridors. Your pilot then aligns your plane with the runway. When you are 10 miles, 16 kilometers, from the runway, the approach controller passes your plane off to the local controller in the airport tower. The local controller in the airport tower checks the runways and the skies above the runways with binoculars and surface radar. Local and ground controllers are the only controllers licensed to use visual information in performing the duties. When the local controller determines that it is safe, he or she gives your pilot clearance to land. The local controller also updates weather conditions for your pilot and monitors the spacing between your plane and other landing aircraft.
Once you've landed, the local controller directs your plane to an exit taxiway, tells your pilot the new radio frequency for the ground controller and passes your plane off to the ground controller. The ground controller watches the runways and taxiways and uses ground radar information to ensure that your taxiing aircraft does not cross active runways or interfere with ground vehicles. He or she directs your plane to the appropriate terminal gate. Ground personnel from the airline use hand signals to assist your pilot in parking
Tower,
the airplane.
hello, Saudi 9322, full standing 05, 10 nautical miles south.
Good evening, Saudi 9322, runway 09, clear to launch, wind 130 degrees, 15 knots, KNH 1027.
KNH 1027, clear to land, runway 09, Saudi 9322. Wind check, Saudi 9322. And ready to
Appel atterrissage, faites le guidage pour le Saudi Airport.
Vérifié.
Ground at 13, to the left, uniform Mike Romeo stand 12.
Okay, first to the left, uniform Mike 12, Saudi 9322.
Saudi, hello, hello,